And let's bring him indeed on the program. This is Mellen Thomas Benedict. Hello, Mellen. Good morning. Okay, Mellen, there we go.
Okay.
We've joked off air about this phone system, so once again it required a double, triple punch of buttons. But our guest again is Mellen Thomas Benedict. And Mellen, good morning.
Good morning.
Where do we find you at this morning, Mellen?
I'm at my home in Santa Cruz, California.
We've got light snow falling here in Lincoln, Nebraska. What are you looking at for weather out there today?
Nice and sunny, but really crisp.
For a Californian, what's crisp?
Let's see. I think we're 64 degrees.
Oh, yeah. That's cause for alarm.
We'll be in single digits tonight. I think it's like 22 right now. So
we're having a heat wave.
Mellen, my friend Ivan Gucci was my reference for you and your work and your story. So I want to thank Ivan right up front for the introduction here. Mellen, tell us about where you were born and raised.
Well, I was born in North Carolina and raised in a military family till pretty much I left high school. So I traveled the world, lived in Europe, I lived in Japan, and really quite enjoyed the life.
I have friends that have lived in Japan who have said the same thing. They, in fact, ended up teaching English over there, and just did handsomely.
Yeah.
Mellen, your life changed, was it in the 1980s?
Yes, it was, about 1981.
Tell us what happened.
In 1981, I was diagnosed with a form of terminal brain cancer. It was at the time inoperable and incurable.
God bless you.
And given 6 to 8 months to live at the time.
And if that wouldn't, the diagnosis itself, exhaust somebody, you were probably not feeling very good either.
I was having, what led me to doctors, I was starting to have a series of blackouts. And those can be pretty scary if you've ever had them, because you wonder, well, what's wrong with me?
My goodness.
I've been having serious headaches for maybe a year before that, and noticed that I had started noticing I was taking a lot of, ibuprofen and things like that. And, noticing I'm taking a lot of these.
I guess once a guy, stops the booze and stops hitting himself over the head with a hammer and stops falling down the flight of stairs daily, you got to sort of wonder, where's this coming from?
Exactly, yeah.
My situation more than yours. So you were diagnosed with inoperable brain cancer. What happened next?
I went through a series of tests, of course, after that, confirming the diagnosis. And I was also a self-employed artist at the time with no medical insurance whatsoever, so my savings ran out very quickly in the testing phase.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take him to figure it out, what was going on?
Not very long. Once I got onto the right doctor. In the beginning, I actually was sent to a dentist. So it might be a dental problem, oddly enough. And so one doctor sent me to the next doctor. I finally ended up with a neurosurgeon, who, oddly enough, later became my mother's neurosurgeon, and my mother died of brain cancer. And my grandmother, before, had died of brain cancer.
Wow.
Strange.
Well, so you're in the throes of a diagnosis here, and your medical insurance ran out.
I had none at all.
So what does a guy do?
Having never been in that situation before, I wanted more opinions, but couldn't afford them, so I ended up in the state healthcare system, and all they did was review the tests I already had, and pretty much told me the same thing. I then, in desperation, drove up to Durham, where I went to the hospital at Duke, at the university there, and literally signed myself in and went in to see a doctor. And, of course, I was asked what kind of medical insurance I had, and I said, well, I don't have any. I'm self-employed, and I've been diagnosed terminal. And very naively, I thought, well, someone's going to pick me up here and help me. But basically, I was given a lecture and sent home.
Wow.
Yeah, Mill and I, God bless him, I had a friend, John Smith, an English citizen who lived abroad most of his life, that moved back to England because of a diagnosis of cancer inoperable. And John outlived, by several years, their prognosis, eventually succumbed or eventually died. And the reason is because he had the same situation. He had no coverage here in America and a closed door. And in England, their healthcare system, I've heard friends that have bashed the English system in many ways, but I tell you what, they take care of people.
Yeah, I really believe this country is one of the greatest countries on earth, and we deserve better education, better health care for our people. I really believe that.
Yep. Fewer weapons and better education, better health.
Exactly. That's what the future's made of.
So you went to Duke, and they said no.
They sent you home.
Right, basically with a lecture. Oddly enough, my mother ended back up at Duke years later in '94, and so I went with her to her visits at Duke, and basically they were telling her, well, you're going to die, and I said, Mom, it's a miracle time. It's now time for a miracle, and my doctor asked me to leave the room and gave my mother a lecture on there are no miracles, you are going to die, you should prepare for it. And I thought that was rather brutal, because when all hope is given up, why not go for a miracle?
Exactly.
Why not have miracle consciousness?
I had a step-grandfather that, in spite of his lifestyle, which we won't go into publicly, lived until a very, very old age, until eventually he was diagnosed and told that he had 6 months to live, and just about, bingo, yep, he was dead.
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecies. I really believe in the work of Bernie Siegel, the doctor, and there's always hope and there's always miracles, and I know I'm one of those who got a second chance.
During this whole thing, it's probably hard to work. You've got bills mounting up. Did you have any sort of a spiritual basis at that time, Mellen, that was a part of your life? Was it becoming important to you?
No, not at all. I was, and forgive me for saying this out there, but I was raised for a number of years in Catholic boarding school. And pretty much, if you've been through that experience, you pretty much come out an atheist, or I would say I wasn't even an atheist. I wasn't even that interested, because at least an atheist seems to be interested.
I was a big fan of Tom Snyder years ago, and Tom talked about his experience with the same sort of system there. This is our guest, Mellen Thomas Benedict. And Mellen, before we go to our bottom of the hour break here, tell the audience again about your website, and we'll do this periodically through the show here.
Okay, I finally, after all these years, got up my own website because I get so many emails and there seems to be such interest in my story. The website is www.mellen, MELLEN-Thomas, mellenthomas.com.
Okay, Mellen, you stay right there. And Kathy and Scott, exploring unexplained phenomena. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, after this.
Listening to Nebraska's first and only community radio station, KZUM, 89.3 on the FM dial and the audio portion on Time Warner Cable Channel 10.
For an eclectic mix of contemporary and traditional Latin music, check out Mundo Latino right here on KZUM, Saturday afternoons from 12:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. I'll be your host. I'm Conrad Castañeda, and you never know what I'm going to play. So once again, tune in Saturday afternoons right here on KZUM, 89.3 FM. See you then.
we're back exploring unexplained phenomena with Scott Colborn and Kathy here. Our guest next week is Barry Taff, talking about some strange geophysical, parapsychological events in Cielo Drive, California. Also, Peg Abernathy the week after. The week after that, Gordon Finn. And our year-end wrap-up show, Paula Harris from Italy and Charles Hall from New Mexico. Today's guest is Mellen Thomas Benedict. And I'm sure glad that you've joined us today, or if you've just tuned in, I think you're going to hear an incredible story. We've laid the groundwork that Mellen is diagnosed with cancer in the early 1980s. It's inoperable, and with no health insurance, he was told basically just to go home and prepare for it. So, what did you do, Mellen? Did you prepare for it?
No, I was actually probably one of the worst cases of handling this you can imagine. I remember when the doctor told me I was terminal, I felt like I was floating out of my body looking down at him. It was quite an interesting experience. I remember being in that mental situation going all the way home. And by the time I got home and into my little house, I was very angry. I became very, very angry and started just a fit of anger and rage and yelling at the world in my house. I blamed God, even though I didn't believe there was a God. Mm-hmm. I blamed God for creating the type of world that would have things like this, and things like this would happen to people. So I blamed everybody. I even blamed my dog at one point. I was so angry. So I was an unhappy camper about the whole thing, and I did not handle it very well.
Your support system, you were without partner at that time?
Yes. I was between relationships at the time, and the thought of going home at that time and dying at my parents' house was intolerable, because at that time I believed I was from the typically dysfunctional American family. I believed my parents didn't love me at the time. I was still dealing with all that. And so the thought of going home and dying at my parents' house was intolerable. That was, I would rather go, jump off a cliff than do that. And I had, in the pursuing weeks, I had thought of suicide, but I thought I couldn't, the thought came to me, I just can't leave a mess for someone else to clean up. So I actually toyed with the idea of suicide, but never actually got around to it.
Oh, geez. It's just going to be a steady round of experiences here. You know, I've had, as I said earlier, Mellen, I've had friends that have gone through that, and it never is really real until it's either close to home or else it's you. Mm-hmm. What's a person do? You just mentioned that some people turn to suicide. Some people probably turn to drugs or alcohol. Mm-hmm. Some people may ignore it. Some people may try to strike out and lash out at other people, that they're to blame. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was very lucky in a way because I wasn't telling anybody, actually. I wasn't telling anyone at all till several weeks into this, and then a very good friend of mine came over to visit me, and I had a friend with her, another lady named Susan, and who I'd never met. And Susan was in her midlife, and her children were out of the home now, and was traveling around visiting friends. And so we decided to take a day and go to the beach. But what got me was, on the way to the beach, they were talking all about their future plans and what they were going to do with their life. And I thought, well, I can't join this conversation. And by the time we got to the beach, I for the first time told someone. I told these two ladies, and because I also started having one of my blackouts, and I'll never forget it. It's the first time this ever happened. Susan reached over and just touched the back of my neck, and the entire pain went away instantly, and I was astounded.
God bless you. And her.
Probably my first ever experience with a sort of a natural healer. And that astounded me. And she said that she had done this for her children all her life. She wasn't metaphysical or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And so I met this woman, Susan, on this trip to the beach. And then later, Susan calls, and we start talking, and she had mentioned that she had had hospice training, which I'd never heard of before, and that she had been asked to house sit for about 6 months or more for a woman who was also going to be traveling the world. And she said, I will be with you to the end if you want. And so I thought, what an angel. And so that's what I did. I moved up immediately to house she was house sitting in, and she had training, and we were in touch with a local doctor, and we came up with a plan for me dying, which is interesting, to plan your death as best you can. Mm-hmm. And I had a living will. I did not want to be resuscitated. And I believe all of this was the end result of a philosophy that I had acquired early in life, and that was the world is a dangerous, negative place. And I was sort of an information person and into ecology. And back in those days, and I've been into ecology, I guess, since the 60s, since the book Silent Spring. And so I was believing the experts all through the 60s and the 70s, and all the experts were saying at the time that even if mankind changed its ways then, there was no hope. We had already crossed the line, that we would overpopulate, overgraze, and probably blow up the world 50 times with all of our nuclear weapons, because it was sort of the height of the Cold War, too. And so I believed that. I believed the experts. And some people say that it's a straw that broke the camel's back. For me, it was a photograph. And this photograph is still floating around. And I'm sure the ecologists meant well, but I don't think they realized the impact it had on people like me and probably thousands and thousands of other people. And it was the famous photograph of Los Angeles from the air compared to a blow-up of cancer cells. And they are very, very similar, and when you look at them that way. And when I saw that photograph, I became convinced in that moment that nature had gone wrong, and it created a cancer called humanity, and that humanity was a cancer on the planet. And that's how I lived. And so, if you get the metaphor later, I developed brain cancer because I'm a human. And there you go with that kind of thinking, which I didn't catch until I had my near-death experience. I didn't even realize what I was doing myself and how I had been living in my heart and subconsciously.
Was there a gradual transition in terms of your health and strength and your vitality up until what would have been your end or your death, Mellen? Or was it very quick?
No, it was very gradual, kind of withering away, because literally I was also just giving up. I was completely overwhelmed and giving up. And the last period, I was really just living on milk. That was the only thing I could really take in. Sleeping quite a bit, and really just literally giving up. I gave away my dog. Shut down my art studio, and basically told family and friends I was moving my studio to the mountains, and that's where I was going to go live. I, at that time, still had not told anybody but the one friend and Susan about my terminal condition.
So how old were you when this happened?
Oh, geez. That was 81 going into 82, and I'm 56 now. So I was in my 30s.
So 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And the time that you were diagnosed until you moved was how long?
Not very long, because once Susan presented this idea to me, I just grabbed it and went for it. It was just a couple of weeks, and I was gone and moved out. And I was a very unhappy camper. I was a very tough case. I really tested her quite a bit during our time together. She was a bit Christian, maybe a little bit too much for me, and she would suggest that we pray, and that would just make me angry. And I remember one time just cussing her out and storming out of the house, and I got to the end of the sidewalk, and I realized, where am I going? And let me tell you, that was the longest walk of my life, was back to that door, and she, of course, accepted me back immediately. But I was not an easy case, that's for sure, all the way to the end. I was very angry.
What happened, Mellen, the day of your death?
I remember basically, at that time I was sleeping rather late, and Susan wouldn't disturb me before, 10 o'clock or 11. And I remember, though, that morning, I remember a burst of light, and I woke up and I looked out my window, and it was sunrise, and I just wondered what the burst of light was. And I just had this feeling at that time. I thought this might be the day, and if you can have that sort of feeling. And then I fell back into a deep sleep. And the next thing I remember is I was figuratively standing outside of my body, looking at my body in bed, and it was a kind of a quality, and people that have had out-of-body experiences can relate. It was a quality. It wasn't a dream. It was more real than that, and a very interesting quality. I didn't think it was a dream, and yet I'd never really had this type of an experience before. But I remember looking at my body, and these waves of light were leaving my body, and my first thought was, I must be dying right now. And in my panic, I figuratively, because when you're out of body, you still feel there is sort of a body there. Maybe it's an energy body. I ran down the hall. I tried to wake up Susan. She was still sleeping, but I couldn't touch her, and I couldn't wake her up, and she couldn't hear me. And so then I find myself back in my room, and there's now I'm surrounded in darkness. And at that point, a life review began. And it began with the exact moment of death and went backwards like a clock. It was amazing. It was an entire life review happening all around me simultaneously, 360 degrees, and it was every moment of my life ticking away in reverse. And what was interesting, though, is that I could see my life for the first time, like a movie. I could see this life I'd lived. And I was also experiencing feelings of things I'd done and the feelings that people had had by my actions and their interactions. And one of the things I picked up in this review is that most of the things that people do to you are not even about you, and you take it personally, and you build resentment, and you build what later I would call karma. But so much that happens to you is really not even about you. It's about people's own stuff. I could see this. I could see this with friends. I could see this with family. I could see this with my mother and father. And my life just ticked away right back into the womb. Mm-hmm. And I believe that we are fully conscious in the womb. And at that point, I understood that my mother and father had really loved me, that I was born out of love. But my parents were fairly dysfunctional, and so my father used to beat my mother, which I found out years later. Because my mother, after she left him, never really talked bad about him. But I remember being in my mother's belly, and I remember my father beating her. And every time he hit her, it was like thunder. And I remember the pain that my mother was going through, because I could feel it. I was connected to her. And so I saw that because of that, it affects people in different ways. What it did was it pissed me off in the womb. So I was born pissed off, and I lived pretty much pissed off to the day I died. And I look back on that, and certain things that people would say about me, suddenly I began to understand that, your deepest stuff is stuff that you don't see, but everybody in the world does. You're the last one to see your deepest stuff. And I remember people telling me, one friend at one time said, geez, in a world of assholes, you're an ass kicker. And that's kind of the way I lived. And because I lived a life of really trying to right wrongs and do the right thing, but that was from a very deep issue that happened prenatally, actually.
Our guest today is Mellen Thomas Benedict, and his website after the 3 W's and dot is MELLEN-Thomas, that's THOMAS.com. and lots of info there on his website. Our guest is Mellen Thomas Benedict. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, our studio line here is 474-5086, and that's 402-474-5086. We'll do our best to get you on the air with a question or comment for Mellen here. Mellen, you've either prior, I don't know how much information you had about quote-unquote near-death experiences prior to your own death experience, or what you've gained afterwards, but people write about a tunnel of light. Did you experience that?
I did experience something similar to what people describe. I think it's actually fairly unique to each individual, but when my life review finished, I was drawn to the light after kind of a small bit of a hellish experience, in that I felt completely alone and in that darkness. And that's the wildest, worst feeling I think you can ever have. But the tunnel for me was very interesting. It was sort of like a tunnel of light, and I was highly attracted to it. But I saw that the light was both coming at me and going to it. I could see light has two directions, and I think physicists will understand this someday. Light is a very interesting substance, and the light was going to itself, and it was coming out of itself. And I started moving towards the light, and I could sense that there were millions, it seemed like, other souls going to the light and coming from the light at the same time. And I noticed that I was in the group going to the light, and I believe now, years later, that was the souls that were dying, and that the souls that were coming from the light, the souls that were being born.
I just had a person call, and they were curious to are you an only child, or did you have siblings? And what?
I had a brother and a sister.
Older or younger?
Older sister, younger brother.
Okay. They just needed to know that. So, and your belief system, I guess, kind of, were your siblings the same?
No, my family was never actually very religious at all. Oddly enough, my parents sent us to Catholic boarding school because they just believed it was a better education.
Mm-hmm.
But because I wasn't actually baptized Catholic, I was called the pagan, and I got in a lot of trouble in boarding school for questioning the authority. The biggest trouble I got in boarding school was everyone had to have rosaries. Your parents had to buy you rosaries, but I'd look at the Christ on the crucifix of the rosary, and it would really upset me. So I would pry him off and just set him free. And every time they'd catch me doing that,
you had to buy a new one.
Had to buy a new one. So they started calling me the pagan.
Did they still use the wooden rulers back then?
Worse than that, actually. In our particular school, they had these, the big bells to call you in from the playground, and they would turn the bell around, hold the ringer. It had a very thick handle on it, and make you hold your hands out and crack your knuckles pretty good.
Oh, really?
That was pretty routine.
This is Mellen Thomas Benedict, and he's just described, ladies and gentlemen, a death experience. And my late friend, who was a previous guest on the program, Webster Robbins, Webster, unabashedly, he said, "There's no near about it. It's a death experience."
Mm-hmm. And so you came back, you saw the souls, what you thought was souls, coming back and forth from the light, and you were heading towards it.
What happened then?
And this is where it gets a little interesting, because I thought my story was kind of normal until Phyllis Atwater, PMH Atwater, kind of discovered me in the backwaters and started getting me to talk about my story. And then she then introduced me to Dr. Ken Ring, who became a very good friend and helped me actually in the course of life I'm in now. But when I got to the light, of course, like I guess anyone would say, the first words sort of out of my mind were, "Are you God?" I saw this light, and I said, "Are you God?" And I didn't believe in God, but I guess when you're there, and it's such an awesome experience, that the light said to me, "What is not God?" And I sort of got that. If you try to name what is God, you'll have to name everything in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's an easier answer to say what is not God. There's nothing that's not God in one shape or another, anything at all, or imagined.
There could be, had a person gone through that experience who was a fundamentalist Christian, that may be troubling in that sometimes there's a persona of a separate but very real God versus what they would look at as being a pantheistic view of God and everything, and yet that's what you were told.
And this is when as it turns out, I'm one of the most studied near-deathers in the world. I'm not one of the famous because I've never put out a book or a movie, although I've been asked many times. I just never have gone that way. But I have taken part in more experiments with more researchers than probably any other near-deather in history so far. And my experience was, now I understand it a lot better than I did then.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it is true. Well, whatever your basic training was in the beginning, you will have that typical type of a near-death experience, whether it be Christian, Islam, Jewish, because that is your basic program that has to play first.
Okay.
And I had no basic program.
Mm-hmm.
My parents had never sent me one way or the other, and of course the Catholics didn't have a very good effect on me either after that experience. And I'm not here to put them down or anything, but it just is what it is. But here's where it changed. I almost immediately got the idea that this was an interactive. I mean, I was speaking to the light, it was speaking to me. And I asked the light, I said, can I hold this just a minute and think about all this? And the light said, whatever. And I realized in that moment, and this is where my experience is somewhat different, and I encourage everyone to experiment with this if you have near-death experience, and that is, just as life is completely interactive, death is completely interactive. You're not on a set program, you're not on a roller coaster ride, if you will just wake up a little bit. And so I asked the question, and as far as they know, it was the first time that was ever asked on the other side, so I engaged and changed my experience consciously. And that began my wonderful experience with the light. At that moment, I said, show me what is God. And of course, the first thing that happened to me was Jesus appeared right before me. And it's wonderful. The essence of that appeared before me. It was absolutely marvelous experience.
Was there a three-dimensional being that...
Very much so, but more than three-dimensional. And then I asked, what is behind this? And then it began, and I've never stopped writing, although I've never put out a book. I may at some point, but I've never stopped writing. I write about an hour and a half a day, and I go back to the light every day, and that's unusual about near-deathers. I think I'm the only one that does that. I go back to the light every day. And Jesus, when I asked that question, the heart of Jesus Christ opened up, and I went into it. But that began what I call the God stream of consciousness. That then opened, like this lotus, into all the other religions that had ever been in their time sequence, because there's been an evolution of religions. And I knew nothing about near-death. I'd never heard the word before. I'd never heard the word metaphysical before. In fact, until after my near-death experience. Was not even into any of that. But I began this experience of the God stream of consciousness, and it took me back to all the religions on earth in the proper time sequence until there was a point in which all the gods disappeared, and that was a point before man was on the planet. Because trees don't need religion, rocks don't need religion, and I had this wonderful experience of seeing how spirituality had evolved and how natural it was, and also that we're evolving into a period of self-initiation is the future. And that religion and religious concepts have been very helpful and sometimes hindering with their dogma and their fundamentalism. But other than that, there's been this natural evolution of mankind, humanity, trying to understand its spiritual nature in the universe. And it was quite a wonderful experience. And I suddenly got it. I go, I see where all this comes from and what it's all about. And then I asked the light, I said, well then, what is the best religion on earth? What religion would I be? And forgive me for saying this, but the light said, I don't care. Religions come and go. Philosophies come and go. What remains is you and me.
Let's pause, Mellen, with those words here. And I'm sure that all over Lincoln, Nebraska, through the internet, we have people riveted to this discussion. We will come right back. Mellen, if you'll be able, can you stay with us until about 11:30?
Sure.
Good. It's great to have you on the program, Mellen. I'm really enjoying this. Kathy, remind us, okay? I want to come back and talk about Mellen's comments about experiencing the light every day.
Oh, I won't forget, because I want to know more about that too. So, wait a minute, that was a teaser there. So we're definitely coming back to talk about that.
Mellen, before the break here again, let's do your website info and let people who have just joined us perhaps fire up the computer and go to your website too.
Okay, and I've just begun the website too, so it's still going to have a lot more coming to it. Because whatever you've read about me on the internet is only the tip of the iceberg. That's I've had nothing really to do with any of that. I've just been in a lot of books by researchers, and that's sort of what's on the internet. I want to bring out the rest of these stories now. But my website is www.mellen, M-E-L-L-E-N, Thomas, MellenThomas.com.
Okay, after the 3 W's and dot, it's Mellen-Thomas.com. And Mellen Thomas Benedict, our guest today on Exploring Unexplained Phenomena. With Scott and Kathy, we'll be right back after these announcements. Music of Deuter.
Each week, New Dimensions explores the social, political, scientific, environmental, and spiritual frontiers with some of today's foremost social innovators, thinkers, scientists, and creative artists.
Hello, I'm Arjuna Arda, author of The Translucent Revolution. Next time on New Dimensions, I'll be talking about how people just like you are waking up and changing the world.
New Dimensions, Saturday morning, 11:30 on KZUM, powered by the community.
This is KZUM 89.3 Lincoln, powered by the community.
This program is made possible in part by a grant from the Zoo Bar at 14th and P Streets, Lincoln's internationally known blues bar, bringing Lincoln blues, reggae, R&B, and roots rock since 1973.
And by KZUM member listeners everywhere.
We're back. A snowy morning here in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's great to have you join us. If you just dialed us up on 89.3 FM or Lincoln Cable TV Channel 10, perhaps you're on the World Wide Web at kzum.org, or in fact you might be listening to us through a delayed podcast and archived program. It's great to have you again join us. Our guest today, Mellen Thomas Benedict, and Scott and Kathy here in the studio. Kathy, so far with Mellen, we've gone to a point where Mellen he's experiencing a physical death, and he's engaged in a dialogue with the light. My question is, at this point, what's happening to his physical body? What's going on right now at this point?
Right.
I believe that my body was shutting down and dying, and I understand the physics of that now because I've gone through 3 layers of understanding since my experience. The first layer was sort of what I call the wonder child, in which I could tell you all about the movie, but I really didn't quite understand all the aspects of the movie, but I could tell you every word in the movie. The second phase, and that was about 5 to 7 years, the second phase was what I call the Thomas phase, because, Thomas in the Apostles, and I use a Christian metaphor here, was a true skeptic in the crowd, and a true skeptic just wants to know the truth. They're not out to find all the phonies. And so Thomas was the only one amongst all the true believers that stepped forward to touch the reality. And so my life has really been that of a true skeptic, even about my own experience.
And you continue to investigate your own experience.
I spent about the next 7 years really reaching out, traveling, and trying to touch everything that I'd ever learned and see if it really was for real. And the third level that I'm at now is the illuminated level, in which it's not a spiritual illumination, but I've had so much time to work with and go back to the light and digest and assimilate my experience that I fully now understand every nuance and every aspect of my experience.
So, Mellen, you are, I imagine, laying in bed and your physical body is dying. Is your friend or any medical staff present?
Not at that time. Of course, I only know this from what Susan told me. I had a living will, and I really wanted to die at that time. I did not want to be resuscitated or plugged up to machines and all of that.
How do you feel about that now? Do you still have, or would you have a living will?
I would still have a living will, because if there's certain conditions, I of course believe in miracles, and even with a living will, you can still have a miracle. And there have been miracles in every known condition on earth, from blindness to dental to MSs. So always have that belief. But otherwise, if I were going to be a vegetable the rest of my life, I'd rather just want to move on to the light and start my next incarnation. And by the way, I didn't believe in anything like that until I had my near-death experience, and it was explained to me on the other side what the incarnation is all about.
Well, Kathy, we're at the point now with the death experience happening and Mellen's interacting with the light. Mellen, what happens next?
It began, I was able to spend literally as much time as I personally needed with the light. This is what's so beautiful about the universe, or the Godhead, or whatever you want to call it. And I literally had a lot of questions. And I asked so many questions, which one led to the next, and it was quite a marvelous experience, which I've never forgotten. In fact, I don't remember it. I just recall it. It's not a memory. I instantly recall it. You just ask a question, the information's there. But I asked so many questions because I was so fascinated with all the aspects of life and things, and I was rather a scientific person on top of it, so I asked a lot of science questions. But I reached a point in which I ran out of questions, and I realized that I had no more questions. And I live that way today. I don't have any questions. I only have answers. But that only means that my questions have been answered, my fundamental questions about life and the universe. Everyone else has a different set of questions they're exploring with the universe and with their Godhead conceptions. And so when I say that all my questions have been answered, it's true, but it doesn't mean everyone else's questions have been answered.
We certainly, even though with this extended format we don't have time to go into the subtle nuances, and that could be for, hopefully we'll have you back for some repeat appearances here, Mellen. But moving through this now, what happens next after you have reached a point where you've got no more questions? Do you have to make I guess in a classical sense, as has been described in the near-death literature, do you have to make a decision about whether to go or to come back?
No, for me it was not that, because by that time I had been given an education in the physics, the mechanics of what reincarnation is all about, and that's something we can maybe get into later. But it turns out that the spiritual or metaphysical explanations of reincarnation are rather flimsy. But the physics and the mechanics, the quantum mechanics of reincarnation are absolutely solid. So I knew that I would be coming back. We all do. We have many mansions and many lives to live, and there is physics behind that. But what surprised me is that the light then said to me, but you do have your first question. And I thought, my first question, then I realized immediately that there was one question that I'd asked early in life that I had forgotten about. And that was, and this may be because of my Catholic boarding school experience, because, they tell you you're going to go to hell forever. Mm-hmm. Bad. So you contemplate very deep subjects like eternity and going to hell forever at an early age. But from that early age, I had always thought about and been fascinated with the thought of, why do we grow old and die? What's that about? If there is a God, why do we seem to just live just long enough to make a little money, get our heads together, and then we die?
All right.
That seemed like pointless. I mean, why create a world like that? And that bugged me. So all of my childhood and all the way until I hit puberty and got interested in women, I asked the same question of everybody, especially if I thought you were a doctor. I asked everybody, why do we grow old and die? And then when I was in high school, I started reading books, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor to explore this aging thing. And that was the question the light said, that was your first question of your life. And I said, well, yeah, well, tell me all about that. Why do we grow old and die? And it was at that moment that two columns of light came out of the light. And from the right column, a little Indian guy came out of the light and started educating me about light, wavelengths, color, and healing. And all I got was the name Denshaw. And it turns out this was a real guy that lived in America in the 30s named Darius Denshaw. And he had done, and this is in my phase after I got back, I checked out everything, but he had been a real person that had been healing people and had been pursued by the FDA and everything back in the 30s for healing people with light. And then out of the left column came this little guy, portly man, with a funny mustache and wearing a beret. And it turns out that this was Walter Russell of the University of Light in Charlottesville, Virginia. And he's quite an interesting character if anyone wants to look him up. Walter Russell, fascinating Renaissance man. I mean, an important character in our history and development that is pretty much forgotten about today. But he was doing fractal geometry by hand, doing drawings of fractal geometry long before supercomputers were ever invented. And he educated me about starlight and the essence of life in the universe is we come from light, we return to the light. It's all about the light, including every process our body makes is based on light function called biophotons. And this turns out, if you want to look up on the internet, look up biophotons. Now we understand what biophotons are, and we can photograph them. Every time any cell in your body does any action at all, it releases and creates biophotons. And that's how your body really communicates. Because we're first and foremost a nuclear structure. We're made of atoms.
Now, it's probably obvious to the audience that this is an altered state. Do you have a sense that some of the typical constraints in terms of how we gauge time passing, had that been altered or suspended during this experience with the light?
Absolutely. It turns out in ultimate reality there is no time. It's always now.
So you could have been spending, for all that you knew, days, and it could have been watching your physical body in your room. It could have been minutes then on
Right. It turns out, from what Susan tells me, that once she came in and found me and started paying attention to my vital signs with amplified stethoscope and some other things, that we had an agreement that she would leave my body alone for at least 6 hours, really make sure I was dead. And she said she waited an hour and a half with no vital signs. And that's when she left the room and went to the other room and started praying. And she was convinced that I was dead.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I know this, we could talk about this for another couple hours or whatever, but I want to make sure that we cover that, how you check in with the light every day.
That was a sort of a surprise to me, and I until I met people like Phyllis Atwater, PMH Atwater, and Ken Ring, I didn't know that was unusual among near-deathers. I thought, they must all be doing it. But in the beginning, the first year or so, the light would just come and get me and pull me out of my body. And of course, when you die, you do leave your body. Your subtle energy, your essence, soul, whatever you want to call it, leaves your body as a biophoton emission and goes into the subtle energy realms. But every time that happened, I thought I was dying again.
Oh, I bet that was kind of scary for your ego. Yeah,
it was scary, but the light would come and take me, and I'd go to the light, and we'd have these great conversations. And I'd always ask the light to be some sort of practical use to the world, because I'm not that much into philosophy. I believe, two humans and a campfire, you got philosophy. And philosophy doesn't seem to have helped the world that much historically speaking at this point. May have clouded up the issue in many times, but I always ask the light, is there anything I can bring back? Is there anything I can do to really help the world in a nut and bolts sort of way? And so every time that I visited the light, I've been given an invention.
Wow.
And I've been tested on this at universities. I can invent on command when I go to the light, and it doesn't matter what the subject is. I've been tested on many different subject levels of information on subjects I should have no information on. But once I realized and calmed, and kind of got a grip on it, I realized I wasn't going to die. It's never stopped. Every day.
Is it random? They just grab, the energy just grabs you and moves you there, or do you have at 10 o'clock I sit down with you?
I can do that also. I developed that ability when I was in the testing program with different groups. But generally speaking, how it happens to me is in the mornings, right after I get up and say I walk, you're not thinking, and I walk into the kitchen or just sitting up on the side of the bed, I leave my body and go to the light instantly. And it's one of those experiences where you realize that every day that you're alive is an absolute miracle. And when you get it, it's stunning. And it still gets me to this day. And then also it helps me remember that even in the worst day of my life, even in the worst day of your life, there are people that would trade you anything. Because even the worst day of your life is full of such potential.
It's knowing just a shadow, a glimpse of what you've experienced, Mellen. You can never really have a boring day ever again, can you?
I have fantasized about that.
I have a daughter who several nights ago we were, preparing to go to bed, and she was having a hard time going to sleep, and she said, "Dad, I'm bored." And I think that we all at some point experience, sometimes fleeting, sometimes continually, feeling that, gosh, there is that sense of, what should I do? And I want something to happen. I am bored. But given your experience, Mellen, have you ever been bored again?
No, I've actually many times fantasized about a normal day or a normal life and how that would be, because my life has certainly taken a very interesting turn of events ever since I began working with Phyllis Atwater.
Well, you know, Mellen, that you're a member of a club. You're a member of a club. You're still in the mix of humanity. You still have to chop wood and carry water. Still have to do all that stuff. But part of what you've experienced and part of what you've received, you're a member of a club. And there is a growing number of people in that club that are starting, as you have done today, to reach out and to speak out. And for that I want to commend you, because it's through people like yourself that the rest of us are truly educated. And sometimes what passes for education is typically not so much that. Maybe we're talking about wisdom instead of education. Maybe that's what we're talking about this morning. Becoming wise and the ways of acquiring that. You can't go back, can you, Mellen, once you've had this experience and this connection with the light?
No, you can't. Many near-deathers try to, though, and that's what's interesting about the near-death phenomenon. And if you read the work of Ken Ring and others who have researched many thousands of near-deathers, many of them spend the rest of their life trying to get back to the light in one way or another.
God bless them.
I just had a caller ask that you talk a little bit more about the reincarnation as you understand it, and kind of your views about it now.
Thank you, Kathy. Mellen, we're not really rushed here. We do have 9 more minutes in the program. I want you to, if you want to tackle this question, to feel free to do that, and we're going to have you back again. So let's not feel like we have to get everything said today, okay?
Right.
Okay.
Callers interested about your views on reincarnation, how that changed, and let's go.
Well, I never believed in anything like that, but one of the things I was told on the other side is that most of the people on Earth, in one way or another, even certain forms of Christianity, believe in some form of reincarnation. There must be something to it. Most of the world, in one form or another, does believe in some form of reincarnation. It turns out that I asked to see the physics behind it, and the physics and the quantum mechanics of it are absolutely fascinating and as natural as rainfall, if you understand how rain is made, how it leaves the ocean, goes into becomes subtle energy in the air and comes back very naturally. It's as natural as rain. And it turns out that all humans on this earth are the same human. We're the same being. It's a greater self that we are a part of. And once I understood how natural these things were, and that we are a part of a regenerative system, the entire universe regenerates itself endlessly, and we are the universe itself in human form, and we do reincarnate, we do regenerate, and it's automatic at a basic level of intelligence. It's automatic like breathing. How many people said, "I'm going to stop breathing," and what happens? You pass out, your body takes over, and you start breathing again. It overrides the mind. There are several layers of reincarnation. There's the unconscious, you might call the natural, redundant system of reincarnation that keeps everything going. And then as you move upper and you become more and more conscious and less dogmatic, you can then begin to have choices over your reincarnation trajectory. And that is simply by realizing that you should process everything in real time now. Don't wait till you die and have a life review and process all of your life's issues.
Yeah.
The best thing in the world to do is process your life issues in real time with real people, and that will change your reincarnation trajectory. It will change your, quote, karma. It will change your life if you will process things in real time, because you can't take it with you. And if you try, that will bring you, the reincarnation cycle is very like electromagnetics in a way, in that you are attracted right back to whatever your greatest attractors are. Was it love? Was it hate? Did you die hating? Did you die loving? Did you die needy? You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm. You have to change your energy and be conscious about changing your energy while you're here.
If you want the universe to change, you've got to first change yourself.
Simple.
Yeah, it is. It is rather and beautiful and elegant too.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of world scriptures early on either embraced or at least discussed openly the theory of reincarnation. A past guest in the program, Abbot George Burke, wrote a small booklet called May a Christian Believe in Reincarnation? And there are other very interesting books, treatises out there about the subject. I'm sure the internet as well is full. There's an old Zen saying, Mellen, that if you think so, so. If you think not so, not so.
That's very, very true, and it branches even into quantum mechanics and that kind of physics also. It's both spiritual and a form of physics also. It really is true. You know, I learned that myself. I believed the world was a cancer, and I believed the humans were a cancer in the world, and what did I get?
Exactly.
Brain cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a classic example of self-fulfilling prophecies and this kind of negative attitude. There's no payoff in a negative attitude when the universe is eternal and it's going to just keep going, and so are you. And when you really understand it and get with it, you'll see what a really joyful world this is and planet. And there's so much good going on the planet, but it's very rarely reported.
Yeah.
And that's because we're still living at a survival level of existence. So it's very important to know where the bad guys are, you know, and where not to go. But in truth, there's much more good news going on in this world, and most people on Earth, no matter what religion or race, are the average basic human being is a happy, curious creation and full of love, is not stressed out by starvation or politics and those type of things. The basic human human is a beautiful, beautiful creation.
Mellen, in our remaining minutes, I've got to ask the question, where was the cancer? Where is the cancer now?
It was brain cancer, and about the size of a quarter, this tumor. And I remember once I'd had my experience, I knew I was cured. I knew I was well, and my body started recovering rather quickly. And so Susan and I had gone to this place to prepare for my death, and then I didn't die. So now we're into another awkward moment.
You have to move out, don't you?
Yeah, and decide, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to die. I'm getting healthy and healthy. And then everyone started suggesting I get more testing, and I was reluctant to do that at first because I said, I don't know what's happened, but I feel good, and I feel like I know what to do now. But a couple of months later, I did something that was rather interesting. I realized that my biggest karma or my biggest issues in life were with my family, and so I did a really crazy but brave thing. I moved back to my parents' house and lived there for 2 years, and that's another experience to talk about. But finally, it brought us to the highest level my family was ever at. Yeah. And then I moved on from there. But in that period, I did go get tested, and they did another scan. And I remember the doctor coming in and putting up the scan, and he said, well, there's no trace. And I said, what? It must be a miracle. And the doctor said, no, we call these spontaneous remissions. And I said, well, it's a miracle to me. But what he said then changed my life in that I said, what do you mean? Because I'm a rather scientific guy. I said, what do you mean? What's a spontaneous remission? He said, well, these happen all the time, more often than people imagine. We don't understand it, but had we cut out the tumor in your brain, every scan or x-ray the rest of your life would have shown scar tissue or a cavity. In spontaneous remissions, the condition returns to normal. There's no evidence that you ever had this now, except for the previous scans. And I thought, the minute he said that, I thought, what is the physics of spontaneous remissions? I must study this. And I spent the rest of my life studying the physics of spontaneous remissions, and that led to the physics of miracles.
See, that's a whole nother discussion that I'd be totally fascinated about hearing. On quantum physics, it just totally groove on. I just love that, and I just love the possibilities involved with that.
Let's have Mellen, with his permission, let's have him back, and we'll
absolutely
figure out a date that you're going to be here, too. Okay. So we'll get him back in the program here.
I'd love to.
Is that good for you, Mellen?
Yeah, I'd love to.
We're a pretty easygoing radio show here. We're a little bit less structured than a lot of the others, and with that comes a little bit more freedom that we can go down the side roads and vagaries and spend as much or as little time as we wish there. So it's been pleasant on my end, Mellen, talking with you, and I've really enjoyed being here and being able to talk with you. Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks for having me. I really love to be an inspiration to people and let them know that this is a great world and great universe to be in.
And you got your website out there once again.
Finally, www.Mellen Thomas.com.
Thanks to my friend Ivan Gucci also for the introduction here. Way to go, Ivan. Another great program. Thank you, sir. And Mellen, as we close on the program, what are you going to do this weekend for fun? What does Mellen do to really have fun?
Well, I've just decided recently to take weekends off because I usually work 7 days a week on the research that I've been doing, and I thoroughly enjoy that. But I'm married recently.
Congratulations.
My new wife has demanded that I at least take off weekends and get a life.
Good for her, yes.
So we'll be going to the beach and then maybe a movie.
Well, if you want to be, come over here and shovel. If you want to fly to Nebraska and experience snow. So it's getting a little thick here.
Yeah.
But
I want to see the new Harry Potter movie. So.
Oh, yeah, I've seen it twice. Go see it.
Yeah.
You're going to have fun. Mellen, again, very enjoyable on our end. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mellen Thomas Benedict, our guest today. The website after the 3 W's and dot is Mellen, that's Mellen, -Thomas.com. And Kathy, what a great program today.
Absolutely amazing and unfolded wonderfully. And I had no idea.